This is a spectacular waste of internet bandwidth, I muttered at 2 a.m., aggressively jabbing at my tablet screen. The web novel was titled The CEO's Contractual Surrogate, and it was an absolute train wreck. The female lead, Maya, was a spineless ex-assistant who agreed to a fake marriage with her billionaire boss to pay off family debts. Her only purpose in the plot, aggressively managed by their nightmare socialite mothers, was to birth exactly 11 heirs to secure majority voting rights for the company's board of directors. 11 kids for stock options. I went to sleep drafting a blistering comment about how Maya needed a lawyer and a spine. Then I woke up. Not in my own bed, but in a painfully modern glass-walled penthouse overlooking a sprawling city skyline. But the floor-to-ceiling view wasn't the shock. The shock was the massive heavy-weight anchored to my midsection. I threw off the Egyptian cotton duvet and stared in pure, unadulterated horror at the highly pregnant belly protruding from my silk pajamas. What in the world? I gasped, poking the side of my stomach. Immediately, 2 distinct, sharp kicks rippled back in protest. Twins. Before my brain could fully short-circuit over the fact that I was now living inside the very dumpster fire corporate romance I had been roasting hours ago, the bedroom door swung open. In walked 2 women clutching iced lattes and designer tablets, looking like they were ready for a ruthless PR meeting. My mother Sylvia and my mother-in-law Victoria. "Morning, our little golden goose," Victoria chirped, adjusting her oversized sunglasses even though we were indoors. "You are looking incredibly fertile today, Maya. The paparazzi caught a great angle of your bump yesterday. The company stock is up 2%. And just think, Victoria, only 2 months left until the first 2 drop," my mother added, tapping away at her tablet. "After these twins, she only needs 9 more to hit the target. 11 heirs means we permanently block the rival faction from the board." A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. "Drop. Target. Excuse me." I croaked, my voice tight. 9 more. "Obviously," Victoria sighed, waving a manicured hand. "Julian's cousins are breeding like rabbits. We need sheer numbers to control the trust funds. 11 is a solid, dominant number. We've already booked your postpartum bounce-back trainers and synced your ovulation calendar for the next decade." She turned her tablet around. On the screen was a terrifying color-coded Gantt chart, mapping out my entire reproductive future to align with fiscal quarters. New, I said flatly, the words dropping like a lead weight in the sleek room. Both women froze, staring at me like my head had suddenly spun in a circle. "No," my mother repeated, her perfectly threaded eyebrows shooting toward her hairline. "No," I said, shifting my weight and crossing my arms over the massive bump. "The baby factory is shutting down after Q3. 2 is a family. 11 is an HR violation. If you want more shares, organize a hostile takeover. If you want more babies, freeze your own eggs. I am not spending the prime of my life as a corporate incubator." Victoria gasped, nearly dropping her latte. "Maya, you signed a contract. I will call Julian this instant." "Please do," I shot back, swinging my legs out of bed. "Tell my husband, I'll be joining him at the office today. We have a contract to renegotiate." Chapter 1. I stared into the cavernous depths of the penthouse walk-in closet, completely appalled. Half of the wardrobe was filled with the original Maya's clothes. Meek beige cardigans and skirts that looked like they belonged to a 1950s librarian. The other half, clearly the recent handiwork of my mother and mother-in-law, consisted entirely of ruffled pastel maternity dresses. They looked like giant, expensive cupcakes. There was absolutely no way I was going to stage a corporate rebellion dressed as a strawberry meringue. "Absolutely not," I muttered to the empty room. I shoved the chiffon nightmares aside, digging deep into the back until I found a sleek, black ribbed knit midi dress. It was incredibly stretchy, hugging the twin-sized boulder attached to my front without suffocating me. I threw a sharp, oversized, minimalist blazer over my shoulders to give off an air of unapologetic authority, and shoved my swollen feet into a pair of pointed-toe loafers. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a docile incubator. I looked like a woman about to fire someone. Perfect. 45 minutes later, I strode through the revolving glass doors of Sterling Enterprises' global headquarters. The sleek, chrome and marble lobby was bustling with morning traffic, but the moment my loafers clicked against the floor, a ripple of stunned silence spread through the room. "Is that Mrs. Sterling?" someone whispered near the security turnstiles. "I thought she was confined to the penthouse until delivery," another hissed. I ignored them, swiping the VIP access card I dug out of Maya's designer purse and stepping into the private executive elevator. I set a mental Pomodoro timer for myself. I would give this 25 minutes of pure, uninterrupted focus to assert my dominance, followed by 5 minutes of deep breathing so my blood pressure wouldn't upset the twins. When the elevator doors dinged open on the 50th floor, the tension in the air was thick enough to slice with a paper cutter. I marched straight past the executive suites and right into the human resources department. Kevin, the head of HR, was in the middle of taking a sip of his coffee. When he saw me, specifically when he saw the massive bump leading the way, he inhaled his latte and went into a coughing fit. "And Mrs. Sterling," Kevin gasped, his face turning an alarming shade of plum. "What are you? You shouldn't be here. Mrs. Victoria Sterling sent over a strict memo. You are on mandatory prenatal bed rest." "Kevin, breathe," I said smoothly, leaning my elbows on his glass desk. "Victoria is my mother-in-law, not my physician. And my background in data analysis tells me that sitting alone in a penthouse listening to Enya is actually depreciating my cognitive value. I am reinstating myself." Kevin looked like he wanted to sink into the floorboards. "Reinstating yourself? As what?" "As the CEO's executive assistant. My old job." "But you're his wife now." "I am legally bound to him, yes. That doesn't mean I lost my typing speed. Have my old desk cleared by noon, Kevin. I'm going to see my husband." Leaving Kevin hyperventilating into a manila folder, I turned on my heel and headed for the corner office. The frosted glass doors of the CEO's suite were firmly shut. I didn't bother knocking. Julian Sterling was seated behind a desk the size of a small yacht, intensely focused on a glowing monitor. He looked exactly like a web novel CEO should. Tailored charcoal suit, jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and an expression so perpetually cold it could freeze boiling water. He didn't look up. I said I wasn't to be disturbed until the 11 o'clock merger call. "Cancel the call," I said, dropping my designer purse onto his pristine desk. "We have an internal crisis." Julian's head snapped up. His icy blue eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a massive display of emotion for him, as his gaze dropped to my bump and then back up to my face. "Maya!" His deep voice was laced with pure bewilderment. "What are you doing here? You're supposed to be resting. The mothers said you were feeling fragile." "The mothers also said we were having 11 children to secure board votes," I fired back, pulling up one of the sleek leather client chairs and sitting down. "So, clearly the mothers are completely delusional. I'm not fragile, Julian. I'm pregnant. It's a biological process, not a terminal illness. And I am officially back on the clock." Julian leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He studied me, his brow furrowing. This wasn't the script. The old Maya would have kept her eyes cast down and agreed to whatever he said. "Back on the clock," Julian repeated slowly. "Doing what exactly?" "Keeping an eye on you," I said, offering him a sharp, thoroughly unsubmissive smile. "Because someone has to protect my future kids' stock options before your mother leverages them for a hostile takeover. Now where do you keep the decoff? I have 25 minutes of focus work to do before my break." Chapter 2. Julian stared at me for a long, quiet moment, his expression an unreadable mask of corporate calculation. Slowly, he reached out and moved my designer bag off his pristine mahogany desk. "You want to keep an eye on me," he repeated, his tone dangerously flat. "My wife, who just yesterday was quietly doing needlepoint in the solarium, is now demanding her assistant desk back because of stock options." "People change, Julian," I said smoothly, reaching into the bag and pulling out a thick manila folder. I dropped it directly over his quarterly projections. Pregnancy gave me a new perspective. Also, a severe intolerance for your mother's nonsense. I opened the folder, revealing a thick stack of papers highlighted in aggressive neon pink. I had spent the entire morning before my dramatic entrance tearing apart the original marriage agreement. Analyzing that archaic document was worse than trying to classify singular points in a differential equation. It was full of hidden traps, undefined variables, and absolutely zero protections for me. "What is this?" Julian asked, leaning forward. His gaze flicked from the pink highlighter to my face. "This," I announced, tapping a manicured nail on the top page, "is a revised marriage contract. An addendum, if you will. Because the original document you had me sign was a human rights violation disguised as a prenup." Julian's eyes narrowed. He picked up the first page, his eyes scanning the text with terrifying speed. Section 4, paragraph 2. A no pregnancy exploitation clause? Read it aloud, I encouraged, leaning back in my chair and crossing my arms. Julian's jaw twitched. The first party, Julian, and his immediate family are strictly prohibited from utilizing the second party, Maya, as a competitive breeding asset. The target number of offspring is hereby capped at 2. Any mention of an 11-child dynasty will result in a direct financial penalty of $1 million per offense, payable to the second party. He looked over the top of the paper, his icy blue eyes locking onto mine. You're trying to find my mother? I'm establishing a boundary, I corrected. If Victoria wants to treat my uterus like a corporate subsidiary, she can pay the premium. Keep reading. Julian flipped to the next page, his expression shifting from annoyed to genuinely intrigued. The cold, unbothered CEO persona was cracking, just a fraction, revealing the sharp, ruthless businessman beneath. Section 5, he murmured. The second party is entitled to a 50% cut of all public relations profits, brand deals, or stock boosts generated directly by paparazzi photos of her maternity state. He set the paper down, steepling his fingers. You want half the PR revenue. I'm doing all the heavy lifting, I pointed out, gesturing to the prominent bump under my stretchy black dress. I'm the one waddling past the paparazzi. I'm the one generating the sympathy and the family man image that just spiked our quarterly shares. I deserve my cut. The sprawling corner office fell silent. The tension was suddenly crackling, thick and electric. Julian stood up slowly, buttoning his suit jacket. He walked around the massive desk, stopping just inches from where I sat. He was impossibly tall, casting a shadow over my chair, but I tipped my chin up and refused to break eye contact. You are entirely out of line, he said softly, his voice dropping an octave. I'm entirely within reason, I countered, my heart doing a strange, rapid flutter in my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the twins. He leaned down, bracing his hands on the armrests of my chair, trapping me in place. I could smell his cologne, something sharp, expensive and intoxicatingly crisp. The board will never approve a revised contract of this magnitude without a fight, he murmured, his face inches from mine. Then it's a good thing I'm back on the clock, I whispered back, completely refusing to be intimidated by his proximity. Because nobody fights dirtier than an executive assistant with nothing to lose. For the first time since I had woken up in this ridiculous novel, Julian Sterling smiled. It wasn't a polite, media-trained smile. It was a sharp, predatory smirk that made the breath catch in my throat. Fine, Julian said, straightening up and walking back around his desk to pick up a solid gold fountain pen. He flipped to the back of the contract and scrawled his signature across the bottom line with a flourish. You have your desk back, Maya. Let's see if you can handle the heat. Chapter 3. The Q3 board meeting was traditionally a soul-crushing marathon of synergy buzzwords and quarterly projections. Today, however, it was a hostage situation. Sitting in my newly reclaimed leather chair slightly behind Julian, I watched in sheer disbelief as my mother-in-law, Victoria, commandeered the projector. My own mother, Sylvia, stood by her side, holding a laser pointer with the menacing grip of a sniper. The 12 male board members, mostly older billionaires who looked like they'd rather be audited by the IRS than be in this room, stared blankly at the screen. And so, gentlemen, Victoria announced, her diamonds catching the fluorescent lights, I present to you the Sterling Dynasty Expansion Initiative. She clicked a button. The screen lit up with a massive high-definition 3D rendering of what looked like a luxury prison complex. To accommodate the target goal of 11 heirs, Victoria continued, her voice echoing in the dead silence of the boardroom. We propose diverting 12% of our tech R&D budget to construct the new West Wing pediatric compound at the main estate, complete with a sterilized air filtration system, a moat, and on-site quarters for 6 bilingual nannies. The chief financial officer, a balding man named Arthur, slowly lowered his face into his hands. Furthermore, Sylvia chimed in, circling a terrifying bar graph with her red laser pointer, we have mapped out Maya's gestation timeline for the next decade. If we optimize her recovery periods. Okay, that's enough, I said loudly, the sound of my chair scraping against the floor cutting through the room. I stood up, adjusting my oversized blazer over my bump, and waddled to the front of the room. The board members looked up at me with expressions of pure, desperate salvation. I walked right up to Victoria and smoothly plucked the remote clicker directly out of her manicured hand. "Maya, what are you doing?" Victoria hissed, her fake smile straining at the edges. "You are ruining the momentum of the ovulation slide." "Victoria, I say this with all the love in my heart. If you say the word ovulation in front of Arthur again, I think his heart might actually give out," I replied dryly. Arthur offered a weak, grateful nod from the table. I turned to face the executives, leaning my hip against the podium. "Gentlemen, I appreciate my mother-in-law's boundless enthusiasm for my reproductive organs, but I can assure you, my uterus is not a publicly traded asset. We will not be diverting a single dime of the R&D budget to build a baby fortress." "But the legacy," Sylvia gasped, clutching her pearls. "The voting shares. If the rival cousins outbreed us, if the cousins want to bankrupt themselves buying diapers in bulk, let them," I interrupted, clicking past the horrifying gestation chart and pulling up a blank screen. I grabbed a dry erase marker. "We don't secure our legacy by turning me into a human clown car. We secure it with market dominance." I quickly drew a massive circle on the whiteboard, writing Apex Logistics inside it. "Apex?" one of the board members muttered, leaning forward. "That AI shipping startup? They're practically bankrupt." "They have terrible management, yes," I agreed, capping the marker. "But their underlying routing algorithm is a decade ahead of anything we currently use. If we take the 12% Victoria just tried to spend on a moat, we can buy Apex out entirely. We integrate their software into our global supply chain, cut our shipping costs by 18%, and permanently edge out the rival faction's profit margins without anyone having to go into labor." The room went entirely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Slowly, Julian leaned back in his CEO chair at the head of the table. He pressed his fingers against his mouth, but it was entirely useless. He couldn't hide the absolute, delighted smirk spreading across his face. His icy persona was fully melting, replaced by the look of a man who was watching his wife set a room on fire and thoroughly enjoying the warmth. "A hostile takeover of Apex," Arthur whispered, sitting up straight. The color was returning to his cheeks. "My God, that's brilliant, and significantly less disturbing than the nursery slide." "Thank you, Arthur," I said cheerfully. "Now I'm going to go eat a bagel. Julian, I'll leave you to draw up the acquisition paperwork. Victoria, Sylvia, I believe your Uber Black is waiting downstairs." I tossed the projector clicker onto the table, grabbed my purse and strutted out of the boardroom as fast as my swollen ankles could carry me, leaving complete corporate chaos in my wake. Chapter 4. I was halfway through a glorious, heavily cream-cheesed everything bagel when the private executive elevator finally dinged open. I stepped inside, fully prepared to ride down to the lobby and enjoy my victory in peace. Before the chrome doors could slide shut, a hand in a perfectly tailored charcoal sleeve shot through the gap. The doors halted, retreating to reveal Julian. He stepped into the elevator, his presence instantly shrinking the already confined space. He didn't press a button. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at me as the doors sealed us in. "Can I help you?" I asked around a mouthful of bagel. "If you're looking for Victoria, I think she's currently haunting the parking garage." "I'm looking for you," Julian said, his voice dropping to that dangerous, quiet register he used during high-stakes negotiations. "I want to know who you are and what you did with my wife." "She's currently on strike," I replied smoothly. "Management negotiations." Suddenly, the elevator gave a violent shudder. My stomach plummeted to my knees as the car jolted to a harsh stop. The bright overhead LEDs flickered, died, and were instantly replaced by the dim, eerie glow of the emergency backup lights. Silence descended, save for the faint hum of the ventilation fan. "Tell me," I said slowly, glaring up at the ceiling, "did Victoria divert the elevator maintenance budget to fund the bilingual nannies?" Julian sighed, running a hand through his immaculately styled hair. A surprisingly human gesture that completely ruined his icy so aesthetic. He reached over and pressed the emergency intercom button. "This is Julian Sterling. Status." A crackling voice came through the speaker. "Mr. Sterling. Apologies, sir. Minor grid fluctuation. The emergency brakes engaged automatically. We'll have you moving in 20 minutes. 20 minutes? I repeated, my voice echoing in the small metal box. I looked down at my massive bump. "Julian, if I have to pee in the next 20 minutes, I am using your expensive Italian leather shoes." Julian actually choked on a laugh. It was a brief, raspy sound, but it was there. He shrugged out of his suit jacket, tossing it over the handrail, and loosened his silk tie. In the dim emergency lighting, with his collar unbuttoned, he suddenly looked less like a corporate overlord and significantly more like a man who belonged on the cover of a romance novel. I stubbornly took another bite of my bagel to distract myself from that highly inconvenient realization. "You were ruthless in there today," Julian murmured, leaning his broad shoulders against the back wall. "Apex Logistics. You completely derailed my mother, saved the R&D budget, and handed me the acquisition of the quarter on a silver platter. The old Maya would have fainted if I asked her to speak in front of the board. The old Maya wasn't carrying two freeloaders who kick my ribs every time I get stressed," I retorted. "And frankly, I was tired of watching you let your mother steamroll this marriage. You're the CEO, Julian. Act like it." He didn't get mad. Instead, his eyes darkened, fixing on me with an intensity that made the small space feel 10 degrees hotter. He took a slow step forward. "Is that a challenge, Maya?" he asked softly. "It's performance feedback," I shot back, though my pulse picked up a frantic rhythm. I leaned against the side wall to steady myself. "Consider it my first act as your newly reinstated executive assistant." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the espresso and expensive cologne radiating off him. "You know, if you were actually my assistant right now, HR would have a field day with this conversation." "Good thing I'm your wife then," I said, entirely failing to sound as unaffected as I wanted to. Before he could respond, a sudden sharp jab radiated across my abdomen. I gasped, dropping my bagel back into its paper bag and grabbing my stomach. Julian's teasing smirk vanished instantly. Pure, unadulterated panic flashed across his face. "Maya, are you in pain? Is it the babies? I'll pry the doors open with my bare hands." "Relax, Superman," I breathed, laughing softly. "They're just practicing their dropkicks. Here." Without thinking, I grabbed his hand and pressed it flat against the side of my bump. A second later, a tiny distinct thud hit right against his palm. Julian completely froze. He stared down at his hand, then back up at me, his icy blue eyes wide and entirely unguarded. The cold billionaire facade stripped away entirely, leaving behind a man who looked utterly awestruck by the little life kicking against his fingers. For a long moment, neither of us said a word. We just stood there in the dim light, the tension in the elevator shifting from combative to something entirely different. Something warm, quiet, and terrifyingly real. Then the lights flickered back on, and the elevator jerked back to life. Julian hastily pulled his hand back, clearing his throat and grabbing his suit jacket as if he hadn't just been completely mesmerized. But as the doors pinged open to the lobby, I caught the faint flush creeping up his neck. The CEO was rattled, and for the first time I realized I was actually having fun. Chapter 5. I was in the middle of reorganizing the Apex Logistics merger files, and eating my third blueberry muffin of the morning, when Kevin from HR burst into my office. He was sweating right through his pastel blue button-down. "Mrs. Sterling," Kevin shrieked, clutching a tablet to his chest like a bulletproof vest. "Have you seen the Financial Inquirer? Or Twitter? Or the morning news?" "Kevin, I've been analyzing spreadsheets for 3 hours," I said, leaning back in my ergonomic chair. "Unless someone accidentally declared bankruptcy, I don't care." He silently slid the tablet onto my desk. The headline, printed in massive dramatic font, read, "Tragic billionaire bride bedridden. The fragile state of the Sterling dynasty's mother-to-be." Beneath the headline was a heavily filtered, tragic-looking paparazzi photo of me looking out the penthouse window from 2 days ago. I hadn't been gazing wistfully at the city. I had been aggressively glaring at a pigeon that was eating my croissant crumbs off the balcony. I skimmed the article. Quotes from an anonymous inner circle source, who clearly sounded exactly like Victoria after 2 mimosas, detailed how my delicate constitution couldn't handle the strain of modern life, and how I was bravely sacrificing my youth to gracefully incubate the first 2 of the 11 legendary heirs. I slowly pushed the muffin away. I am going to commit a white-collar crime. The PR department is losing their minds, Kevin panicked. Investors are calling. They think the CEO is running a 19th century Victorian asylum. Where is Julian right now? I asked, my voice deadly calm. He's doing a live remote interview with Global Market News in the media room on the 48th floor, Kevin whimpered, to discuss the Apex acquisition. I stood up, adjusting my chic, stretchy maternity slacks. Perfect. I'm going to go do some PR. When I pushed open the heavy double doors of the media room, the red on-air light was glowing brightly. Julian was seated in a plush leather armchair, looking devastatingly handsome and utterly exhausted as a perfectly coiffed reporter grilled him via a giant plasma screen. Mr. Sterling, while the Apex merger is impressive, the market is buzzing about the alarming reports regarding your wife's health, the reporter probed, using her best faux sympathetic voice. Is it true she's under 24-hour medical surveillance to ensure the delivery of your 11 children? Julian's jaw tightened. My wife's health is excellent and those reports are complete and utter garbage, I announced, walking right onto the set. The cameraman gasped. The reporter on the screen blinked rapidly. Julian didn't look mad. He just covered his mouth with his hand to hide an immediate massive smirk. I pulled up an empty chair, dragged it right next to Julian and sat down. I looked directly into the camera lens. Hi, Maya Sterling here. Not bedridden, not fragile, and definitely not incubating a soccer team, I said cheerfully. I'm the executive assistant to the CEO, and the only thing currently causing me distress is the fact that my mother-in-law tried to use company funds to build a baby fortress with a literal moat. The reporter's jaw dropped. A moat. A moat, I confirmed deadpan. In this economy, let me be perfectly clear. We are having 2 children. Twins. That is where the factory closes. Anyone who tells you we are having 11 children is either hallucinating, or they are a billionaire socialite entirely detached from the reality of diaper costs and global overpopulation. But the legacy, the reporter stammered. The Sterling legacy will be fine, I interrupted smoothly. My husband just executed a brilliant supply chain buyout that will cut global shipping costs by 18%. We are modernizing this company, not running a medieval dynasty. Now, if you'll excuse me, these 2 future shareholders are demanding another blueberry muffin. I stood up, gave the camera a cheerful wave and waddled right off the set. By the time I reached my desk, my phone was vibrating so hard it was dancing across the wood. I checked Twitter. The clip had already been clipped, shared, and memed into oblivion. No Moat Maya was trending at #1 worldwide. Teenagers on TikTok were lip-syncing my speech. Millennials were praising the relatable corporate wife, roasting the billionaire lifestyle. 10 minutes later, Julian strolled into my office. He leaned against the doorframe, his hands in his pockets, looking entirely too smug. You just tanked my mother's entire social standing, he noted. She started it, I replied defensively. Are the board members having aneurysms? Actually, Julian said, his eyes dancing with amusement, our stock just spiked 3.5%. Wall Street absolutely loves the idea that the CEO's wife is ruthless, grounded, and fiercely protective of company assets. He walked over, grabbed my empty muffin wrapper, and tossed it in the trash. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, his voice dropping to a low, warm murmur. Remind me to renegotiate your PR cut. You're severely underpaid, Mrs. Sterling. Chapter 6. Over the next week, a strange new phenomenon occurred at Sterling Enterprises. The notoriously cold, aloof CEO suddenly forgot how to do his own job. Julian, a man who built a logistics empire from the ground up, was suddenly incapable of reading a basic spreadsheet without my expert opinion. He started leaving his corner office every 45 minutes just to lean against my desk and watch me type. Yesterday, he called a highly unnecessary 30-minute meeting in my office just to debate whether the break room should stock plain or peanut M&Ms. I voted peanut. He immediately ordered a pallet of them. I was pretending not to notice that my fake husband was heavily flirting with me, mostly because I was too busy dealing with the fallout of my viral interview. Which brought me to Thursday afternoon. I waddled into the executive dining room on the 50th floor, craving a quiet plate of truffle fries. Instead, I found a 2-woman ambush waiting at my favorite corner booth. My mother, Sylvia, whom I hadn't seen since the board meeting, was frantically reapplying her Chanel lipstick. Beside her sat Victoria, wearing a massive pair of dark sunglasses indoors like a disgraced celebrity in hiding. Oh, look who decided to show her face, Sylvia snapped as I approached the table. Do you have any idea what you've done, Maya? I had to cancel my Tuesday Pilates class. The other wives kept asking me if I was going to help you dig a moat. You could use the cardio, mother, I replied breezily, sliding into the booth opposite them. And Victoria, taking off the sunglasses won't kill you. The fluorescent lights aren't judging you. The internet is. Victoria ripped the glasses off, her eyes blazing. You humiliated us. No moat, Maya. Do you know how hard it is to secure a PR team to spin a hashtag like that? You need to issue a retraction immediately. Tell the press the pregnancy hormones made you hysterical, and that you are fully committed to the 11-child dynasty plan. I flagged down a waiter, pointed to the truffle fries on the menu, and waited for him to walk away before turning my attention back to the terrible duo. I'm not retracting anything, I said, folding my hands on the table. But I have been doing some basic math, Victoria, and I have a question for you. How many siblings does Julian have? Victoria blinked, completely derailed by the question. What? None. Julian is an only child. Right, I said, leaning forward. One child. Exactly one. So tell me, Victoria, if 11 is the magical required number to secure this glorious corporate legacy, why didn't you have 11 kids? Sylvia gasped, covering her mouth. Victoria's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. That is entirely different. Victoria sputtered, her diamonds rattling as she waved her hands. I had social obligations, charities to run, galas to host. I simply didn't have the time to be perpetually indisposed. Ah, I see, I nodded solemnly. You were busy hosting galas, so having one kid was fine. I am currently running a multinational supply chain buyout, but I should turn myself into a human clown car because... What? You need a hobby. Maya, Sylvia hissed, kicking me under the table. Have some respect. This is about securing the family trust. The trust is fine, Sylvia, a deep voice interrupted. We all whipped our heads around. Julian was standing right behind my booth, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his tailored trousers. He looked down at the two women with a gaze so icy it could have flash frozen the entire dining room. Julian, darling. Victoria backpedaled, plastering on a fake smile. We were just having a lovely catch-up. I heard. Julian cut in, his voice dangerously soft. And let me make this very clear to both of you. My wife is not your PR project. She is not a pawn for board votes. And she is certainly not going to apologize for pointing out basic hypocrisy. If you ever corner her on my floor again, I will personally revoke your building access. Are we understood? Sylvia and Victoria looked like they had been slapped with a wet fish. They scrambled out of the booth so fast Sylvia almost left her Birkin bag behind, speed walking toward the elevators in total silence. Julian slid into the booth beside me, crowding my space with his broad shoulders and that intoxicating cologne. The icy glare vanished the second he looked at me, replaced by a warm, thoroughly amused smirk. You handled that well, he murmured, his eyes dropping briefly to my lips before meeting my gaze. I had it under control, I pointed out, my heart suddenly doing a ridiculous gymnastic routine in my chest. I know, Julian said softly, reaching over to steal a truffle fry from the plate the waiter had just nervously set down. But I realized something today, Maya. Watching you completely dismantle everyone in your path is quickly becoming my favorite part of the day. Chapter 7. By Friday evening I was completely drained. Between finalizing the Apex Logistics integration, fending off 3 passive-aggressive emails from Sylvia about my lack of maternal softness, and carrying around 2 tiny kickboxers, I was ready to collapse. But the most exhausting part of my week wasn't the corporate espionage or the warring matriarchs. It was Julian. He had spent the entire week practically stalking my desk under the guise of synergy. He had also developed a devastating new habit of rolling up his dress shirt sleeves to the elbows whenever he leaned over my monitor to review supply chain data. It was calculated. It was distracting. It was borderline psychological warfare. Lying on the massive velvet sofa in the penthouse, wrapped in a plush robe and eating peanut M&Ms straight from the bag, I pulled out my phone to vent to my best friend, Chloe. My thumbs flew across the screen in a blur of exhaustion and sugar-induced manic energy. I swear to God, if this man rolls up his sleeves one more time to expose his forearms while talking about quarterly margins, I am going to throw a stapler at his head. It's an HR violation. He is weaponizing his jawline. How am I supposed to secure a tech monopoly when he smells like expensive decisions and looks at me like I'm a tax-deductible snack? Send help. Or ice water. I hit send. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table, letting out a heavy sigh, and popped another M&M into my mouth. A second later, the phone buzzed. That was fast, I thought, reaching for it. Chloe was usually perfectly in sync with my rants. I unlocked the screen. The message wasn't from Chloe. The color drained from my face, completely replaced by a wave of heat that practically set my hair on fire. I hadn't opened my chat with Chloe. I had opened the thread right above it. Julian, CEO/fake husband. I stared at the screen, my soul leaving my body and ascending to the astral plane. The little read receipt was glaring at me, mocking my very existence. 3 agonizing dots appeared at the bottom of the screen. He was typing. I strongly considered throwing the phone off the penthouse balcony, faking my own death, and starting a new life under an assumed name in a country without Wi-Fi. The phone buzzed. I squeezed my eyes shut, mentally preparing my resignation speech, and looked at his reply. Julian. I can roll the sleeves down if it's a workplace safety hazard. Unfortunately, I can't do much about the jawline. Also, I approve of the tax-deductible snack comment. Very fiscally responsible. I let out a sound that was half-gasp, half-strangled scream, hiding my face behind my hands. Another text came through. Julian. For the record, I wasn't reviewing the supply chain data today. I was just looking at you. My heart hammered against my ribs like a frantic bird. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of my corporate boardroom confidence, and typed back. Maya. Consider this a formal written warning for inappropriate executive conduct. See me in my office at 9 a.m. Julian. Yes, ma'am. Should I wear a tie? Or is that too distracting? I locked the screen and shoved the phone under a sofa cushion. The fake marriage contract was officially in shreds, the workplace tension was at a boiling point, and the cold, unbothered CEO had completely vanished. I was in so much trouble. Chapter 8. The Apex Logistics Acquisition Gala was supposed to be my corporate victory lap. It was a massive black tie event held in the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. Entirely funded by the 18% shipping margin I had mathematically secured for the company. I was wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that draped beautifully over my bump, proving once and for all that a pregnant woman could still look like a ruthless corporate overlord. Julian, meanwhile, was wearing a bespoke black tuxedo that was doing catastrophic things to my blood pressure. I kept the sleeves rolled down, he murmured, leaning close to my ear as we paused at the top of the sweeping marble staircase. His hand rested warmly on the small of my back. For workplace safety. A tuxedo is worse, I whispered back, aggressively avoiding his eyes by staring at a very interesting chandelier. It's practically a hostile work environment. I felt his low chuckle vibrate against my shoulder before we descended into the sea of billionaires, socialites, and flashing cameras. For the first hour, everything was flawless. I charmed the board members, graciously accepted compliments on the Apex buyout, and successfully avoided the hors d'oeuvres that smelled suspiciously like fish. Julian didn't leave my side, playing the part of the devoted husband so perfectly that I was starting to genuinely forget it was supposed to be a fake contract. But my peace was violently shattered when Arthur, the CFO, pulled Julian aside to discuss a sudden fluctuation in the Asian markets. The moment Julian stepped away, the predators circled. Maya, darling. I suppressed a groan as my mother, Sylvia, and Victoria flanked me, effectively trapping me against a towering ice sculpture of a swan. But they weren't alone. Standing behind them was a tall, overly tanned man holding a designer briefcase and an oversized tablet. We didn't want to bring this up at the office, seeing as Julian is so sensitive lately, Victoria whispered loudly, her eyes darting around the room. But we've taken the liberty of hiring Dr. Montgomery. He is the premier fertility architect for the top 1%. A fertility architect? I repeated flatly. What does that even mean? Does he build tiny condos in the fallopian tubes? Dr. Montgomery gave a tight, bleached white smile. He stepped forward, holding up his tablet. On the screen was a terrifyingly detailed, color-coded spreadsheet that I immediately recognized. The 10-year ovulation Gantt chart. Mrs. Sterling, the doctor said in a soothing, infomercial voice, we have optimized your postpartum recovery window. If we harvest eggs immediately after the twins' delivery, we can begin the surrogate drafting process for heirs 3, 4, and 5 by Q2 of next year. We just need a cheek swab today to finalize the genetic profiling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a long sterilized cotton swab. I stared at it. Then I looked at Victoria and Sylvia, who were practically vibrating with excitement. Are you out of your minds? I asked, my voice rising just enough to turn the heads of the 3 nearest CEOs. Are you actually trying to DNA swab me at a corporate gala to secure a volume discount on babies? Keep your voice down, Sylvia hissed, her eyes widening in panic as more people turned to look. People are staring. Let them stare, I snapped, stepping away from the ice sculpture. I am not a timeshare, and my uterus is not open for investor bidding. Dr. Montgomery, if you come within 3 feet of my face with that Q-tip, I will snap it in half and bill you for the disposal. Maya, Victoria gasped, clutching her chest. He is on retainer. We paid him a massive advance from the family trust. Then you just wasted company funds. A voice cut through the crowd like a frozen blade. The whispering attendees immediately parted like the Red Sea. Julian strode through the gap, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying fury. He didn't look at his mother. He walked straight up to Dr. Montgomery, who suddenly looked very small and very sweaty. Dr. Montgomery, Julian said quietly. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Every billionaire in the room was openly eavesdropping. You are trespassing at a private corporate event. Mr. Sterling, I was just consulting with your mother regarding the, dynasty expansion. You are fired, Julian interrupted smoothly. In fact, you are blacklisted. If I ever see your name associated with my family, my company, or my wife again, I will have my legal team litigate your practice into the Stone Age. The doctor swallowed hard, lowered his tablet, and practically sprinted for the coat check. Julian turned to Victoria and Sylvia. They shrank back under his glare. Julian, please, we were just being proactive. Victoria started. Julian held up a single hand, silencing her. Then he turned and faced the silent, staring crowd of the city's most powerful elite. He reached out and pulled me to his side, his arm wrapping securely around my waist. Let me be perfectly clear so there is no further confusion among our families or our shareholders, Julian announced, his voice projecting across the ballroom. My wife is my partner. She is the mastermind behind our most profitable quarter in a decade, and she is the mother of the only 2 children we are ever going to have. She is not a strategic asset. If anyone in this room ever attempts to treat her as one again, they will answer directly to me. A pin drop could have been heard over the string quartet. Julian looked down at me, the icy fury melting from his eyes, replaced entirely by a fierce, undeniable heat that made my breath catch. Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Sterling? He asked softly. Yes, I breathed, my heart pounding a frantic, victorious rhythm against my ribs. Julian didn't just lead me out of the ballroom. He laced his fingers through mine, walking me through the stunned crowd of high society like I was the most valuable thing he had ever acquired. The spreadsheet was dead, but the contract was officially in serious danger of becoming real. Chapter 9. The morning after the gala, the penthouse was terrifyingly quiet. The spreadsheet had been vanquished, Dr. Montgomery was banished to the Shadow Realm, and my mother and mother-in-law had been thoroughly neutralized. Which meant it was finally time to address the empty, echoing guest room down the hall. The nursery. Armed with a tablet, a tape measure, and a very specific vision, I waddled into the room. I was going for Scandinavian minimalism. Clean lines, neutral tones, and absolutely zero clutter. I had just finished mapping out the optimal grid coordinates for the matching cribs when I heard the heavy thud-thud-thud of footsteps coming down the hallway. Maya! Julian called out, his voice slightly muffled. Can you open the door wider? We have a clearance issue. I frowned, walking over to pull the heavy mahogany door fully open. A clearance issue with what? Did you buy a... I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing in the hallway was Julian Sterling, ruthless billionaire and feared corporate shark. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt that completely ruined my ability to form coherent thoughts. But that wasn't what stopped me. What stopped me was the massive 6-foot-tall plush giraffe he had in a chokehold. What, I said flatly, is that? This, Julian grunted, awkwardly maneuvering the giant, spotted neck through the doorway, is Jeffrey. Or maybe Bartholomew. I haven't decided yet. He's going in the corner. He dropped the wrench, shifted onto his knees, and crawled over to where I was sitting. He boxed me in, his large hands resting on the rug on either side of my legs. I sat at his massive conference table, surrounded by 3 empty takeout containers, a mountain of crumpled sticky notes, and the final acquisition drafts for the tech monopoly merger. My lower back felt like it was being compressed by a hydraulic press. I let out a low groan, throwing my pen down and stretching my arms over my head. You'll miss the hidden liability clauses in Section 9, I retorted, tapping my temple. You're a visionary, Sterling. I'm the one who reads the fine print. We're a team. I recognized the crisp, heavy stock immediately. It was the original marriage contract. The one that legally bound us together under a web of corporate obligations, fake public appearances, and an expiration date. Speaking of fine print, Julian murmured, his voice dropping to a low, rough register. I've been reviewing this all night. He leaned over the mahogany table to sign the billion-dollar contract. Right at that exact second, I felt a strange, distinct pop in my lower abdomen. I froze. A second later, a warm rush of fluid absolutely soaked my designer maternity slacks and pooled onto the antique Persian rug beneath my chair. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," I whispered. Arthur, who had incredibly sharp hearing for a man his age, turned his head. He looked down at the puddle. He looked up at my face. All the color drained from his body. "Mrs. Sterling," Arthur squeaked, clutching his chest. Are you leaking?" "My water just broke, Arthur. Please don't pass out, we haven't secured the final signature," I hissed, grabbing his arm to keep him upright. At the podium, Julian had just touched pen to paper. He paused, noticing the sudden commotion in the front row. "Maya, is everything all right?" I offered him a tight, deeply uncomfortable smile. "Everything is fine, Julian. Just sign the contract. Quickly." "Maya," Julian said, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He dropped the pen. The journalist leaned in, cameras flashing. He stepped away from the podium and walked toward me. "What is going on?" "Nothing." I lied through my teeth as a massive sweeping contraction suddenly seized my midsection. I gripped the armrests of my chair so hard my knuckles turned white. "Just securing the legacy." Julian reached my chair and looked down. He saw the puddle. He saw my white-knuckled grip. In a fraction of a second, the cold, composed multi-billionaire CEO completely blue-screened. "Your water broke," Julian said, his voice entirely devoid of its usual calm authority. "Your water broke. Right now. In the boardroom." "I am aware," I grunted, trying to breathe through the pain. "Now go sign the paper so we can go to the hospital." "To hell with the paper," Julian bellowed, his voice booming across the silent, shocked room. Before I could protest, Julian leaned down and literally scooped me up into his arms, entirely abandoning a billion-dollar merger on live television. "Julian, put me down. The stock margins." I gasped as he marched toward the double doors. "I will buy the entire stock market tomorrow," he shouted back, kicking the boardroom doors open with his Italian leather shoe. "Kevin, call the hospital. Tell them we are coming. Tell them to clear the roads." "I don't think Kevin controls traffic," I managed to say as another contraction hit. The elevator ride to the private garage was a blur of me doing deep breathing exercises while Julian paced in a terrifying, caged tiger panic, repeatedly pressing the door close button, as if it would make the elevator move faster. When we reached his sleek, bulletproof SUV, he practically threw me into the passenger seat, buckled me in, and sprinted around to the driver's side. He peeled out of the parking garage so fast the tires shrieked. "Julian, breathe," I panted, gripping the dashboard. "You are driving a luxury vehicle, not a getaway car. We have time." "We do not have time, Maya. You are having 2 babies," he fired back, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He honked his horn at a completely stationary mail truck. "Move. Corporate emergency." "It's a biological emergency, you lunatic." I laughed, despite the agonizing pain radiating through my spine. Julian carefully stood up, moving with a rigid, terrified stiffness as if he were carrying live explosives, and gently leaned over the bed. He transferred our son into my left arm and our daughter into my right. I looked down at their tiny, squished faces. They were perfect. No moats, no 12-year Excel spreadsheets, no corporate breeding timelines. Just Leo and Stella, entirely ours. Julian sat on the edge of the mattress, leaning his forehead against my shoulder. He wrapped his large hand around both of mine, letting out a long, shuddering exhale. "Are we sure we don't need to brief them on the quarterly margins?" I joked softly, leaning my head against his. "Absolutely not," Julian murmured. "They are not allowed to look at a spreadsheet until they are at least 30. And even then, only if they want to." A sudden sharp knock on the heavy sweet door shattered the peaceful silence. "Julian!" Victoria's shrill voice penetrated the solid oak. "Julian, tell this man with the earpiece to move. The grandmother has arrived." Sylvia is double parked downstairs with the PR photographer. Julian's head snapped up. The soft, vulnerable new father vanished in a millisecond, replaced instantly by the ruthless CEO. He stood up, marching over to the door and pulling it open just a crack. I could see the broad back of Julian's head of security, Marcus, firmly blocking the hallway. Behind him, Victoria was attempting to peek around his bicep. "Mother," Julian said, his voice dropping to absolute zero. "Darling, the paparazzi are in the lobby. We need a photo of the first batch for the evening news cycle." Victoria hissed eagerly. "The first batch is sleeping and my wife is recovering from a major medical event," Julian stated, crossing his arms. "There will be no photos. There will be no PR spin. And if you or Sylvia attempt to bypass Marcus before the mandatory 48-hour blackout period is over, I will personally cancel both of your black cards." Victoria gasped. "Julian, you can't just lock us out of the dynasty." "Watch me," Julian replied smoothly. "Goodbye, Mother." He shut the door firmly in her face, locked the deadbolt, and turned back to me with a deeply satisfied smirk. "I love Marcus," I said, a massive smile spreading across my face. "We should give him a bonus." "Done," Julian agreed, walking back to the bed and pressing a warm, lingering kiss to my forehead, and then to each of the twins. He sat back down, taking my hand in his. "It's just us, Maya. The board is locked out. The factory is officially closed. 2 is more than enough." Epilogue. 4 years later. The Sterling Enterprises annual holiday gala was in full swing. The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns, sharp tuxedos, and endless champagne. The company's stock had tripled since the Apex acquisition, and I had successfully transitioned from executive assistant to chief operating officer. I stood near the ice sculpture, a tasteful geometric design this time, no swans, sipping a glass of sparkling cider. Julian was at my side, his hand resting possessively on the small of my back, listening to Arthur drone on about offshore tax codes. Our peaceful evening was interrupted by the familiar, terrifying clatter of high heels. Victoria and Sylvia materialized from the crowd, both armed with glossy, high-end folders. "Maya! Julian, darling!" Victoria chirped, air kissing the space next to my cheek. "We know you've been busy playing executive, Maya, but Sylvia and I found the most divine new clinic in Switzerland." She practically shoved the folder into Julian's chest. I caught a glimpse of the cover. It featured a serene-looking woman holding an infant on a snowy mountaintop. "It's an exclusive genetic retreat," Sylvia added, leaning in conspiratorially. "The twins are 4 now. They are practically in college. It is the perfect time to aim for number 3. The board would be absolutely thrilled." I didn't even have to open my mouth. I just looked at Julian, raising a single perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Julian didn't lose his temper. He didn't even drop his polite, terrifying CEO smile. He casually took the brochure from his mother, folded it neatly in half, and handed it to a passing waiter holding a tray of empty crab cake plates. "Thank you, Victoria, but we won't be needing the Swiss retreat," Julian said smoothly, his voice carrying just enough to silence the immediate area. "Oh, nonsense," Victoria scoffed, waving her hand. "You're in your prime, Julian. We can still hit 5 if we tighten the schedule." "Mother," Julian interrupted, his smile sharpening into a blade. "I am going to stop you right there. I had a vasectomy 3 years ago." Victoria froze. Her jaw actually dropped. Sylvia let out a sound like a deflating tire, and had to grab the edge of the ice sculpture table to keep from falling over. "Oh, what?" Victoria whispered, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. "A vasectomy," Julian repeated, enunciating the word with absolute delight. "The factory isn't just closed, Victoria. The machinery has been permanently dismantled." But the 11 heirs," Sylvia stammered, looking frantically between us. "The dynasty. The dynasty is at home, terrorizing the nanny with a giant stuffed giraffe," I chimed in, stepping closer to Julian and wrapping my arm through his. "And frankly, I think 2 is a highly optimized portfolio." As the mother stood entirely paralyzed by the destruction of their decade-long breeding plot, I turned to Julian. He looked down at me, his icy blue eyes dancing with love, amusement, and fierce devotion. I raised my crystal glass, clinking it gently against his. "To corporate synergy," I murmured. "To a hostile takeover," Julian corrected softly, leaning down to capture my lips in a kiss that completely ignored the flashing cameras of the press, sealing our perfectly hijacked, entirely modern happily ever after.